The Vikings' first enemy wasn't the sea storms or the wars. It was winter, a season not just cold, but brutal to the point of feeling almost inhuman. In Scandinavia, nights could stretch to 18 hours. Temperatures could drop to 30 OC. North Sea winds sliced through every wooden seam, and moisture froze directly onto people's hair. That wasn't weather. It was a natural sentence handed down to every community, year after year. Archaeology from Iceland and Denmark shows that child mortality in some places surpassed 1/3. Tiny bones warped from malnutrition and prolonged cold, and signs of arthritis appearing even in young adults, revealing bodies worn down more by freezing winds than by blades. Whether rich or poor, free or enslaved, winter made no distinctions. It crushed those who were poorly prepared and punished any family that underestimated the power of darkness. In many parts of Norway and Sweden, daylight shrank to only a few hours, making labor, hunting, and travel nearly impossible. In that reality, survival wasn't about strength. It was about understanding the climate, reading the seasons, calculating food stores, and designing a home as a biological shield. And from that silent but relentless struggle, the Vikings were forced to become engineers of the cold long before they became warriors. If you want to keep exploring the little-known secrets of the Norse world, share your thoughts below and follow the next chapter of this journey. Stepping into a Viking longhouse wasn't stepping into a home. It was stepping into the most sophisticated survival machine Northern Europe ever built. Walls over a meter thick were stacked from wood, stone, and tightly compressed turf, forming a thermal fortress strong enough to withstand the 30 OC winds pouring down from the Arctic. Above it, a heavy, damp grass roof not only shielded the house from snow and rain, but trapped every bit of heat released throughout day and night. At Lofoten, reconstruction models show that even when blizzards tore across the exterior, the inside still stayed between 13 and 18 OC, just warm enough to keep children, elders, and livestock from freezing to death in their sleep. But what made the Longhouse a true masterpiece wasn't the materials. It was the arrangement within. People slept near the central fire, animals were brought to the sides to form a secondary layer of heat, and food was placed in naturally cold zones to extend its lifespan. Every detail, from the flooring to the position of the smoke vent, was a life or death calculation. The house didn't just block the wind, it functioned like a living body, breathing, storing warmth, and sustaining the community through the darkest months of the year. This was the first and most crucial wall the Vikings raised against the fury of winter. If you want to see the next secret hidden beneath the haze of the central fire, stay tuned. In the heart of the Longhouse, where the dark earth floor had been polished smooth by generations of footsteps, the fire wasn't just the only source of light, it was the soul of the entire community. One hearth, just one, had to keep more than 30 people, and an entire cluster of livestock warm beneath the same roof. If it died out, death didn't come slowly. It arrived that very night, as the wind slipped through every crack and turned the first breath after sleep into frozen air. That's why the fire was never allowed to sleep. At Rides and Edeby, ash layers over a meter thick show that families kept embers alive for weeks, even months at a time. Slaves took shifts guarding the fire at midnight. Children learned to rekindle coals as soon as they could walk. Any mistake could throw the whole household into permanent darkness. But the most shocking part was the price that fire demanded from them. Roofs at Borg and Lofoten were pitch black from soot accumulated over decades. The air inside the Longhouse, rarely fully ventilated, carried particle levels equal to smoking dozens of cigarettes a day. Bone studies at Jorvik reveal signs of pneumonia, alveolar damage, and fibrosis, the outcome of spending an entire life inside a room where survival and death hung from the same flame. And here lies the twist. The very thing that kept them alive through the night was the same thing that made them age faster, weaken earlier, and carry an illness they never had a name for.
For generations,
Yet they accepted it, because in the Nordic cold, there was no alternative. Fire was both savior and patient executioner. If you ever thought the Vikings were only strong on the battlefield, imagine living your whole life under an atmosphere that could quietly kill anyone. Do you think you'd have the courage to survive in a house like that? Leave a comment. Your perspective might open a new angle for others. An Anglo-Saxon historian once wrote that the people of the North carried the smell of fire, but when archaeology uncovers the houses buried by time, we finally understand that the phrase wasn't a metaphor. Inside a longhouse, the air was thick with smoke, animal fat, and human breath, a world where every part of life, eating, sleeping, working, took place under a ceiling blackened by soot, layered over generations like scorched memories. Roof fragments from Borg and Bork show wood so deeply stained that no one had ever seen the true color of their own home. At Jorvik, skeletons with damaged lung cavities and signs of fine dust inhalation confirm what the old people never put into words. Every breath was a trade-off between the heat that kept you alive and the silent illness that slowly killed you. During winter months, when darkness lasted nearly 18 hours, light barely slipped through the narrow cracks, only to be smothered again by smoke. The house became a glowing cavern lit by embers, but choked by low oxygen. A place where the mind wore down, the body weakened, and the spirit could snap as easily as the timber roof, bracing itself against the storm outside. Yet in that suffocating space, the Vikings still sang sagas, told stories of their ancestors, and clung to their community as tightly as to the last surviving pocket of warmth. They understood that survival meant accepting a brutal truth. Without smoke came freezing death. With smoke came slow pain. And between those two paths, they chose the only one winter allowed. Share your thoughts. Do you think you could endure a survival environment this suffocating? In a Scandinavian winter, the human body doesn't negotiate. Either you take in enough fat, or you begin to fail within weeks. At temperatures between 20 OC and 30 IOC, energy needs can exceed 5,000 calories a day, and that turned animal fat into something more valuable than gold. Archaeology from Avi, Birka, and Greenland shows cut marks on cattle, pig, and goat bones clustering around the fatty areas. Evidence that the Vikings treated fat as a survival priority, not lean meat. But behind that lies a harsh and debated truth. Fat wasn't shared equally. The wealthy kept barrels of fat, tallow, and oily fish in cold stores, while many poor families, slaves, and children had only thin barley and turnip porridge, a meal that didn't hold enough heat to survive the night. Icelandic records mention burying barrels of manteca underground as secret reserves, to the point where fat became a kind of winter currency, traded for wool, labor, or even protection. On some long nights, a Viking father faced a ruthless choice: kill the cow to get the fat that would save his family, or keep it alive so he wouldn't break the breeding cycle the whole village relied on. And in certain folk tales, there are stories of children surviving thanks to one last ladle of hot fat, a privilege the lower classes almost never touched. In that world, eating fat meant living. Lacking fat meant disappearing before the sun returned. What do you think fairness looks like in a reality like that? Share your thoughts. In the Viking world, winter wasn't just a season. It was a ruthless equation where every unit of food was counted like the final heartbeat of the community. They didn't use the concept of calories, but relied on inherited experience and ancestral intuition to know that if their stores didn't last until the thaw, the entire village would disappear before it ever had the chance to sow again. That's why turf-lined cold cellars in Tjorsardalur and sealed clay silos in Suecia were built like magical chests, where heat, cold, and humidity were balanced through an almost instinctive understanding. When archaeologists opened them, they found traces of dried turnips, air-dried fish, tallow, and even buried barrels of manteca still intact after many months. What astonishes modern people is the shadow economy built around those reserves. Iceland's Gragas law punished anyone who wasted food, not for moral reasons, but because one careless act could push dozens into inescapable darkness. Wooden boards with carved marks have been decoded as ration logs, a kind of ledger of the night, where every line represented someone's survival in the village. And when supplies dropped to alarming levels, the atmosphere inside the Longhouse changed, quieter, tighter, as if everyone could hear winter knocking early at the door.
Welcome, my brothers.
It was this cold, instinctive, measured calculation that allowed many communities to endure the endless nights. Each barrel of provisions wasn't just food. It was a vow between humans and winter. If you had to live under those conditions, what do you think would be more terrifying, the cold itself, or the smallest mistake made by human hands? Leave a comment and let's talk about it. For the Vikings, fermentation wasn't a cooking technique. It was a kind of survival algorithm, where death was bent back into life through rules only winter could understand. When archaeology opened the buried pits in Adavi or Iceland, people didn't just find fish, curds, or grains. They found an entire harsh logic. Anything that could rot had to be redirected into a form of rot that was useful. Bubbling barrels of herring, bowls of coagulated milk, or green-flecked mold on grains that modern people would immediately throw away. These were, for them, the markers that life could be stretched for many more months. Stranger still is that the unbearable smell modern visitors can't stand was actually the Norse microbial armor. Lactic acid and light alcohol from fermentation slowed harmful bacteria, turning dangerous water into safe, weak beer, turning nearly spoiled fish into precious vitamin D stores, and turning fragile milk into skyr that could outlast entire storm seasons. Every fermented dish was a charm against hunger, passed down as a legacy from one generation to the next. What surprises many people is this: the foods with the most terrible smell were often the ones that kept the community alive the longest. That was the paradox winter forced humans to accept. What seemed worthless was often what held them closest to survival. If you were in that situation, would you dare eat something decaying but safe? Or would you trade winter endurance for the comfort of familiar flavors? Share your thoughts. Your perspective might reveal yet another hidden secret of the Viking world. In the Scandinavian winter, darkness didn't just cover the sky. It slipped into every breath. For weeks at a time, The sun skimmed the horizon for only a few minutes before disappearing again, leaving behind 18 hours of dense night so heavy that many people lost their sense of time, no longer sure what day it was. Inside the smoke-filled longhouse, heat and soot blended together, turning the space into a weighted cavern where a child's cough echoed like a reminder that the human spirit was being worn down as well. The Vikings didn't know about hormones or seasonal disorders, but they understood an ancient truth. Darkness could steal the will long before it stole the body. So each night they gathered around the fire, telling sagas, reciting genealogies, and singing the stories of their ancestors as a necessary ritual. They believed that if silence stretched too long, the soul would be swallowed by the night. Wooden talismans and runes carved onto bone were kept as anti-despair medicine, a way to keep the mind from slipping into the abyss. In the suffocation of smoke, the lack of light, and the long, unbroken silence, the Vikings' fiercest battle wasn't against snow. It was against their own minds. How long do you think you could endure a night that lasts an entire month? Share your thoughts. While many European peoples stayed indoors waiting for winter to pass, the Vikings treated ice and snow as a chance to prove the strength of their entire community. What astonishes scholars is how they turned what others saw as a shutdown into a system of trade and a display of power. At Upokra and Adavi, sled runners and iron fittings show that they optimized snow transport, carrying up to 5 times more goods than wheeled carts, a logistical advantage no agricultural society of the time could match. And while southern Europe struggled with mud and flooded roads, Viking traders glided across frozen lakes as if traveling on highways, bringing back salt, furs, and even luxuries like Mediterranean glass. The drama lies here. What others feared, they flaunted. In many legends, winter travel was seen as a symbol of honor. Anyone who crossed the frozen rivers before the thaw earned greater influence in the village council, a kind of political flex only the North could understand. In Jorvik, traces of winter markets even show that they held special trading sessions at the coldest point of the season, as if deliberately proving that their community was strong enough to challenge winter itself. For the Vikings, ice didn't lock the doors. It opened the roads. Each journey across the snow was a statement that power didn't only come from the sword, but from the ability to live and move where others gave up. If you lived in that era, which group do you think you would belong to? The ones waiting for winter to end, or the ones turning winter into a stage for strength? Share your thoughts. There's a truth few people expect. In the moments when the Vikings faced the deepest cold of winter, what brought them down wasn't blizzards or hunger. It was their own bodies. A small cut while chopping wood, a lingering cough inside a smoke-filled longhouse, or even a single meal lacking proper nutrients could turn winter into a death sentence. And in that harsh reality, we see the true face of Viking medicine. Primitive, unforgiving, yet effective enough to surprise the modern world. Archaeological evidence from Jorvik shows that many amputations healed cleanly, proving they knew how to stop bleeding with boiled flax fibers and keep wounds sanitary with honey, whose natural antibacterial strength is astonishing. Small handfuls of sphagnum moss were placed on wounds like prehistoric medical gauze. Herbs such as juniper, angelica, and wild garlic were boiled, crushed, or smoked to ease pain and fight infection. Even without science, they created a last-minute lifeline system built entirely from what the mountains and meadows allowed them to reach. But behind that resilience lay a darker side few want to confront. More children died than survived. The poor lacked remedies, and the loss of a healer could mean the collapse of an entire village. Viking medicine never promised full recovery. It only gave them one more day, one more week, one more chance to outlast winter's grip. The lesson is here. In a brutal world, knowledge, no matter how small, is the strongest weapon. If you've ever experienced a moment where you had to manage without any support, share your story below. And if you want to keep exploring the survival secrets buried for 1,000 years, subscribe so you won't miss the next chapter.